Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Lindsay McGuire to talk about what it's like to be a board member, which is kind of like a extension or maybe a part two to the episode we had a couple weeks ago about building board members. So, Lindsay, very excited, happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, super excited. This is a really big passion point of mine and something I love advocating for. So very excited to talk about board membership today.
Super. So for people who are hearing you then for the first time, could you share your superhero origin story?
Yeah, I guess if I would need to talk about what brought me into the nonprofit space, it would have to be my mom. So growing up, my mother was a program manager at a local food bank. I was raised in St. Joseph, Missouri. And so my first kind of interactions through nonprofits were through my mom. And so I would come and volunteer alongside her. She would bring me to work every now and again, and I would get to see the inner workings of that nonprofit. And she really kind of opened my eyes to not only the area of nonprofits, but just having that servant's heart and being very focused on giving back and serving your community. And I actually interned with them when I was in high school and did a year-long internship at that food bank. And I think that's kind of my origin story of how I got involved in nonprofits. And then as I've grown up, as I've developed and aged and progressed in my career, have found other ways to be involved and give back. And service has always been kind of a love language of mine, I guess I could say. And so I guess my origin story really is all thanks to my mom. It's kind of cheesy and cute, but that's kind of where I started out with.
Service as a love language. That's awesome. That's a sixth one, I imagine, then I believe there's five. And then in terms of being a board member, I'm curious to know how you guys started. How many nonprofits are you on the board already? Like, tell me a bit more about how that started and why it became such a passion for you.
Yeah, again, I think it's just kind of rooted in how I was raised and the ideals kind of my mother and father put into me at a young age. But my first board position was actually with the American Advertising Federation in North Alabama. So I was their marketing and communications chair on their board for a little over a year, almost close to 2 years while I lived in Alabama. They're a nonprofit that represents the advertising and marketing industry. It was just very related to what I was doing. They were a very strong partner of the credit union that I worked at. And the credit union, anyone who's familiar with credit unions, they are very service and community focused and very much encourage their employees to give back through board service. So they kind of connected me with AAF of North Alabama. And that's how I got involved really in my first board position. Really great experience. I got to help kind of plan their addies and do a lot of their programming and a little bit of a different sector than the rest of my nonprofit work because it was very much like trade and industry based. But that's kind of my first experience of being a board member. And then at that same time was introduced to Make-A-Wish North Alabama, took a board seat on their young professional board, helped run their first pumpkin chunkin event, which was so much fun. And I actually finagled, he was my fiance at the time, now my husband, to also serve on that board with me, which was really, really a great experience and so cool to watch him do that alongside me. So I was on those two boards for the 2 years I was in Alabama. And then we relocated to Indianapolis it's crazy, 6 years ago now. And since I've been in Indianapolis, I have served on what used to be called Indiana Recycling Coalition. Now it's called Circular Indiana. Was part of their board for 3 years and also served 2 years on the board of Junior League of Indianapolis. While I was with Junior League, had a lot of great opportunities. I was part of their coalition that looked into changing our focus area, which we had the same focus area for about probably 6 or 8 years. And so worked very closely across board members, league members, sustainers to identify new focus area for our league to focus on for the next few years. Currently actually not active on a board right now because I am welcoming my second child, and just kind of as I rolled off of those two boards here, decided we're going to take a break, focus on family for a little bit, get through that newborn phase, because I was actually in conversations to join a board in this past August, September time. And then as I was thinking about it and realizing like, whoo, girl, you're going to be like down in the doldrums with a newborn and healing from birth. And that's just not a good time to join another board. So I'm actually taking a pause for a bit. But once I'm kind of back up and running at full speed, there's probably 2 orgs that I'm thinking about to reach out to and hopefully join their boards as well.
That is awesome. Yeah, it makes total sense as well, of course, to take a pause, focus on family. So good for you for doing that. Some people get so caught up in the whole idea of being of service that they prioritize that over other things. So I'm happy to see that you keep that balance between family and being of service.
Yeah, it was kind of
Um,
a hard decision to make because I am a yes person, but you are correct. Like you really need to focus on your priorities, and sometimes other priorities will trump your need and desire to serve.
they say, I don't know if it was from that movie Yes Man, but I think it was. The quote was, every great adventure begins with the word yes. So I like to say yes often as well because it only leads to fun. Well, not only leads to fun things, but that's the only way it can lead to fun things. What would be a reason why someone should become a board member? Like, what is the main driving force for you? You kind of talked a bit about being of service, but is there a certain list or a certain um, thing that people can expect to receive or participate of or feel belonging of or to? Like, what would motivate, I guess is a real question I'm asking, someone to become a board member?
Yeah, there are so many reasons, and I could talk about this for hours on end. So you might have to kind of shut me up on this, but there's just so many facets to why I encourage everyone, and I mean everyone, to serve on a board. I think first and foremost, it's a way to play in your passion areas that you might not be likely able to do maybe in your day-to-day career. So, for instance, if you love animals and you just love being around dogs or cats or exotic animals or whatever it might be, but maybe you don't work in an industry where you'd ever have that opportunity, volunteering, being a board member for a humane society is a great way to fill that open spot and that void and that passion area in a way that you won't be able to do in kind of your 9 to 5 or your 40-hour-a-week job or whatever it might be. So I think first and foremost, it's a great way to plug into your passions. And you'll find a lot of people who serve on boards are serving on boards for organizations that they are incredibly passionate about and have a connection to, whether because of their interests or because of what they've experienced themselves or something their family members have gone through. So for instance, my father has gone through cancer twice now. And so maybe at some point in time, I might want to invest my time in a specific research, like cancer research organization that focuses on the cancers that he's overcome. So I think there's also a personal point of that where you can take your life experiences and find organizations that are making changes in those areas that are really valuable and important to you and your family and your friends and whatever might play into there. But I also think board service is a great opportunity for self-development, career development, skill development. And some people might say, oh, that seems kind of weird that you would like be getting something out of it as yourself. And it's not just, a service or giving of yourself to an org. But my time in junior league, like we're an organization that focuses on the development of women. Like that is really our core mission. And serving on the board of junior league has given me so much back over time. I've learned how to better run meetings. I've learned how to create agendas. I've learned how to review budgets, make fundraising decisions, work with people, work with large teams, small teams, diverse teams. So I think as much as you might think of board service as you serving the organization and doing good in your community and in your backyard, there's also so much that you can gain from the moments and opportunities you have. And especially too, if you're looking to develop yourself in a way that you might not get in your career. Again, so board service, I mean, I'm a marketer, I'm a content marketer, I'm a writer. I do not dabble in numbers and finances for the most part. I mean, now that I'm in marketing leadership, I do some budgeting work. But beyond that, I mean, I am not like a finance person in any way, shape, or form. But having served on these boards over the last 6, 7 years, I've been able to learn so much about budget sheets and finances and numbers and financial planning and due diligence and finances. So there's opportunities in board service to develop yourself in other areas and explore other areas. If you're considering a career switch or a career change, or thinking about other opportunities or ways you can drive your life, board service is a great way to kind of test that out. Is oftentimes, especially in organizations that are 100% volunteer run for the most part. Junior League has one employee. So very much like volunteer based, or Impact 100 is also volunteer based. Joining their board, you can serve in ways and capacities that you likely are not given in your day-to-day job, your day-to-day role. And you can learn and you can test and you can see if it's a good fit for you or not. So you can actually honestly get so much back out of it as a person. And I think it's also a great way to find your people. Like if you're passionate about sustainability and helping, reserve our natural resources, joining an organization focused on that and serving their board will connect you to so many other people who are incredibly passionate about the same thing and are likely to speak your language and understand why you're passionate and why you do the things you do. And you just build a community, and then you can then bring people into that community as well. So there's a lot of magic that happens.
So I got 4 main ways: a way to play in your passion project, connection, interest, things that are important to you, self-development, and then finding your people. Awesome, awesome list. And I'm very grateful for your father, because I lost my grandmother, and it was the second time that cancer came that took her. So congratulations to your father, and for being able to get past that second time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a sensitive topic for me too. So I'm just gonna keep talking.
I feel you. I understand.
So you mentioned volunteering. So and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, but I want to make sure it's clear. Serving as a board member, it is a volunteering, right? There's no payment, at least directly from the nonprofit, in any capacity. I don't know if I've even heard of one, but I want to make sure that it's clear that this is a volunteering type of position. It's a give and take, but there's no financial incentives or reasons to become a board member.
Oh, yes, 100%. So very different than if you were on the board for, a software company. I come from SaaS and software. So very, very different than serving as a board member or advisor for a for-profit company. So in nonprofit board service, actually, usually you are making an investment in the organization as a board member. So one thing grantees look for in grant applications is actually financial backing of the board. So if you don't have 100% backing of your board from a financial standpoint, as far as board members donating to your organization, that's actually a very poor reflection of an organization when they're seeking grants. So as a board member, oftentimes when you're talking with an organization about becoming a board member, it's likely that they either have a certain level that they expect board members to donate to. A lot of times it can be, whether you donate it yourself, you do a fundraiser to help try to raise funds to that level. Sometimes there will be a give and a get. So you'll be expected to give X amount of money, but then you'll also be expected to get and fundraise an X amount of money. So it's actually kind of the reverse, where you are expected to bring funds into the org. And no, board members are not, allowed to financially gain from their service or from what they're doing as a board member. And there are also strict stipulations around your business interactions and how that interplays with the organization, especially if you're doing any granting of money to orgs, things like that. Conflicts of interest are very, very important to make known and to excuse yourself when necessary, and not having that cloud your decision making as a board member. But yes, you are correct. No financial gains. If anything, you are not losing money, but you are investing money in that organization as a board member.
And reading between the lines, it sounds like it's important to read what is expected of you as a board member. So before you agree to become a board member, make sure are you expected? How much are you expecting to either donate yourself, like you said, or get from other people in terms of fundraising, and any other commitments that are required of you, whether it be financial or time or expertise or X, right? There's obviously going to be or should be a list, a criteria, a filter, a requirements that each board member needs to fill and agree to before they become a board member.
Yes, that is crucial in when you're trying to decide whether you have the time and capacity and funds and ability to serve as a board member, because it is a very, very serious volunteer position. A lot goes into being a board member, and organizations should be able to provide you kind of like a board expectations list or a board matrix or a board contract or whatever kind of format they want to share that with you. But it should stipulate, you have to attend this many meetings per year. Your board term is X amount of years. You are expected to not only be at board meetings, but involved in one committee, and that looks like this. And your expected time investment per month is this, and your financial investment that we want to see from you is this. So when you are considering board service, those things should all be very clear from the organization. And if they're not, don't be afraid to ask questions, because that's something that they will need to develop and create over time to be able to have strong board recruitment. Because for any board, you're going to be losing, it depends on the size of your board, of course, but you're going to be losing multiple board members every year or every few years. And so you need a very strong board recruitment strategy, which includes the clarity around what it even means to be of service to your board. So yes, when you're considering joining an org's board, always be very crystal clear on what their expectations of you are and know if you can fulfill those or not. And if you can't fulfill them 100%, have that conversation around if it's feasible or not, because the last thing you want to do is take a board spot and not deliver as a board member when someone else was likely probably thinking or considering it and wasn't able to fulfill that spot because it was filled already. So just be very, very cognizant of what's expected of you and if you can actually deliver on those expectations as well.
It also sounds like, I kind of already know the answer to this, but when you're being chosen to be eligible, or at least being chosen to be a board member, the nonprofit is most likely seeking you based on either who you are and your ability to do fundraising, or a certain skill set that you have that's unique to you. So I'm curious to know, is there a certain skill set that most nonprofits look for? Like is there a golden four type of board members, like someone who's in finance, someone who's in tech, someone who's in some other aspect? Is there the usual suspects of people who are normally requested to be on boards, or is it really based on the individual needs of the nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely always comes down to a nonprofit's individual needs, and especially to considering what resources they have staff wise and where their gaps are staff wise. The needs of a board of an organization that's all volunteer led or has, under 10 employees is going to look vastly different than the needs of a nonprofit that has 100 plus employees and, a larger board size. So those all play roles and considerations into those. But I will say there are probably, three high demand areas that nonprofits almost always need as far as like board members. Of course, fundraising is a big obvious one because that is what fuels nonprofits is fundraising. And that's what really dictates a lot of the success of a nonprofit is their ability to have cash flow and cash funds and things like that. So strong fundraisers, people who are not afraid to fundraise, people who have backgrounds in fundraising or understand fundraising, always crucial to a nonprofit board. Another one will be people who have backgrounds in finance. So, the treasury spot is usually a harder one to fill on a board, and it is an executive position on a board. And so most likely these orgs are going to be looking for anyone who has a background in finances or accounting or budgeting or spreadsheets and numbers and data analysis, because those things are so incredibly important for your budgeting and your strategic planning and your grants and all those things that cycle into, how your funding's looking, how you're using your funding, how you're planning your funding, and all those things. And then the third area I would say is marketing, especially for And then the third most sought after kind of board member skill set, I would say, is marketing. This is especially true for smaller organizations that likely don't have a full-time marketer, or their full-time marketer is swamped by so many things and wearing so many hats. So marketers are super, super crucial to nonprofit boards and really in demand. And I will say one issue I've seen over time with nonprofits is they try to find marketers to serve the marketing role on their board, which is great because obviously those people have the skill set, the experience, the knowledge. But a lot of time marketers are incredibly burnt out and they don't necessarily maybe want to serve in a marketing role on the board. They want to do something different or more diverse or just not be in their kind of like work head necessarily through that board service. And even myself, I have a rule that I will only serve one nonprofit at a time in a marketing capacity, whether from a council perspective or a board perspective. So think that's one area that's really hard is to find people who have marketing skills and are able and willing to fulfill that from a board level. And then beyond just like the skill sets, there's actually three areas, I guess I would say, that are also very, very important for boards to be thinking about. So first is having representation of the audience you're serving at the board level. So many nonprofits fail here. And there's a lot that goes into why they fail here. And that's probably a whole nother discussion. But if you don't have representation of who you're serving on your board, then you're already behind and at fault because you're not having that perspective at the table at your board discussions. And if you're making decisions around how you're serving your population or your demographic or your audience, and they're not represented at the table, I mean, that's like so unfair in so many ways. And it's not going to serve you well, and it's not going to serve your population well. So being sure that you have people who are representative of who your organization is serving at that board level is crucial to success and to building out programming that makes sense and making the right decisions for who you are serving in your community. The second area is diversity of age. If you look at boards, a lot of them are going to be very, very similar across the ages of those serving. And granted, if you have a larger board, this is going to be less of an issue because you have more seats and you usually have more age diversity. But on smaller boards, a lot of the times you might find maybe a 5 or 10 year kind of age range sometimes. And that's going to narrow your scope of your thinking and your innovation and your perspectives and what you're bringing to the table and the diversity of thought there. And so I always encourage nonprofits and also people who are thinking about, serving a board, like you need to be aware of those things and you need to have the whole gamut. And especially, some boards skew very much older because those people have more time to give. Usually they have more time to serve. They're more flexible and available. But if you don't have those younger board members, you're going to get caught up in some very much and this is across any similarities. If you have too much of one thing, but you fall into groupthink and you don't have people challenging you or questioning if this is the right way to do it or the right way to think about it or the right approach and strategy. So always thinking about the age diversity on your board is so important as well. And don't think because you're young that you can't bring value. I mean, some of the best board members I've ever met have been young board members. And I think more organizations are seeing the value of even creating a young professional board or one that is more youth aligned, youth serving. And the third area of that is also the diversity of your board. That's also something that is becoming more and more important to grantors when you're applying for grants is what's the diversity and makeup of your board, both as far as the ratio of men to women, the ratio of the different ethnicities, and then also, if you provide this data, your sexual orientation and that representation as well. And then again, going to that first point, how is that diversity of your demographic you're serving represented in your boardroom? And this is one where we need to make a substantial amount of progress in across all those areas. But that's another thing to think about too. There's so many gaps in the diversity of boards. And when you look at some boards, they all look kind of like different representations of the same person. And so that is one thing to keep in mind too of how diverse is your board? Where are your gaps? and being very strategic in filling those as well.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. There's a lot of different threads that I could pull on here, but there's two of them that caught my attention most. I'll do it in order. The first one was about marketing, how you talked about it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to find someone who's marketing because typically those are people who are already doing marketing as a day job. And it kind of reminds me of a situation where if you're a chef, for example, in a restaurant, you might not be likely or interested in cooking at home because you do it all day as your day job. And it seemed to be a similar analogy where if this is what you're doing, if your marketing is what you're doing during your day job, how much energy, how much output can you actually produce volunteering as a nonprofit? And it sounds like that is just something that is real and is concerning, and making sure that the person who is committing to becoming the marketing board member is ready to give in those hours and do the work, even though they may be doing it during the day. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, yes, that's a great interpretation and kind of roundup of that because I mean, I'm a living, breathing example of that. Like I said, I will only serve one org at a time in a marketing capacity because I know how much more I can add on to what I do on a full-time basis. And I know my limits and when my quality will begin to err and fall down the rabbit hole and diminish. So it's just knowing that and also being cognizant of that when you are doing your board recruitment and not being maybe, I don't know if alarmed is the right answer, but just not being surprised, I guess, if you're approaching marketers for marketing roles and you're getting a lot of no's because it's probably exactly what you said.
Mm. The second thread was we're talking about youth. So when you talk about younger or youth members on the board, I'm curious to know if you can give me an actual range. Are we talking about teens, 20s, 30s? What age category are we talking about when you say youth?
Yeah, it depends on your organization for sure and who you're serving, what programs you're running, what's your area of expertise and service. But I mean, I would say the full gamut, honestly. And again, it all depends on your org and what services you're providing, who you're serving, things like that. But I think a lot of nonprofits, especially ones that are more focused on youth services and children and youth under 18, are seeing the value of, like I said, bringing that demographic into either their board or a youth board or a youth council or some way having them have a seat at the table and a voice at the table. In general, I would say it's more of those very young professionals in their very early 20s who have likely graduated college, possibly in their first kind of like level of their career, their first kind of large job, because they have the new, fresh, innovative ideas and they are the ones who know where the world is going and they can bring so much value into understanding what's going to appeal to those audiences. Because what a lot of nonprofits face, especially if they're older orgs who've been well established for a long time, you probably have an aging donor base. And the fight is to continually figure out ways to bring in the newer, younger donor bases and not only bring them in, but retain them and make them feel like your organization understands them, you can serve them in ways that make sense to them. And so if you don't have those young professionals and those young people at the table, you're never going to know what is going to appeal to that demographic. And you're likely going to be very hurt in that arm of your fundraising. So I think there's a lot of orgs who have seen this play out where you just skew to a very certain age or a certain demographic. And because those people aren't well represented, you just keep wondering, like, oh, why can't we break into this segment or this market or this age group? Well, it's because you have no one with that voice at the table and you don't have anyone guiding the decisions you're making, and what you're doing probably isn't appealing to them. So having those young voices, those young people represented, and again, it depends on your org and what you're doing and what your focus is on, but having them come into your organization and have that, seat at the table, that voice at the table, that can only help you in the long term because then you'll be able to figure out strategies to pull those people closer into your org, appeal to them, and maintain them long term.
And then once you're on a board, once you are a board member, typically how long is the commitment? Is it, a short-term lifetime commitment, or is there usually a certain duration that's in mind? I guess it's part of the contract that kind of every year you get renewed. But even if it is a renewal every year, like, is it normal? Normal, of course, is in quotes, but is it normal to have people who are on boards for a couple of years or 10, 20, 30 years? Like, I'm just curious to know from the perspective of a board member, making sure you know what you're getting yourself into as becoming a board member. What is your runway in terms of length of being a board member?
Yeah, that's a great question. It will vary from org to org, but I would say the average board term is going to be 2 to 3 years. So as a board member, your term that you sign up for will be on average 2 to 3 years. And like I said, this will vary across orgs. And there's a lot of discrepancies across the map. But I would say on average, that's usually what you'll see. It's a 2 to 3 year term. Oftentimes you'll be able to re-up to a 2 or 3 term limit. Highly recommend having term limits. If you don't have term limits at your organization, then you're going to fall victim to people being around for much longer than it's going to be a service to your organization. Because then again, you're falling into probably those pitfalls of groupthink or not bringing in fresh new perspectives, not bringing in people with new perspectives, people who might get settled in doing things the way they've always been done. And this usually happens when people have been board members for like a decade plus. But usually you'll find orgs will have term limits or they'll have certain rules around, okay, you can serve 2 limits, but then you have to roll off and then you could possibly come back in X amount of time or something like that. And there are some organizations that have I'm going to say this wrong, emeritus status, which, if you serve for a certain amount of time, then you're considered almost like an advisor to the board. You're not necessarily a board member or a full-fledged member. And the stipulations on what that might entail will differ. But that also is an opportunity sometimes for people who want to serve longer or have served longer. And then depending on the organization and their structure for how they are going to sequence their leadership, sometimes certain positions will have certain stipulations on their terms. For instance, some organizations might have a very specific path to president-elect, president, and then past president. So that might also change your time investment of how long you're serving the organization. I know sometimes past president positions are 1 year, sometimes they're 2 years, sometimes they're built more like an emeritus status. So it'll change from org to org, but generally when you sign up to be a board member, it's going to be a 2 to 3 year service commitment. You'll have a certain amount of money you'll have to either donate or fundraise for per year of your board commitment. And then there'll be certain stipulations of, you need to serve on this committee or you need to run this event. For instance, like Junior League, our largest fundraiser of the year is called Holiday Mart, and we always run it in November. And if you serve on the board, you're expected to serve a certain amount of hours of volunteering during that Holiday Mart week. So there'll be other things that are very unique to your org of like what's expected as far as your time commitment. But I'd say usually it's a 2 to 3 year commitment for a single term. Usually you can do at least 2 terms if you would like.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fresh meat, fresh blood. I don't. These are bad expressions, but I mean the idea is new ideas. You always want to keep things new ideas. Fresh, new energy to be able to keep things flowing. Because I agree, it can be very easy to flow into groupthink and to forget about new possibilities and keeping up with new technology, for example.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I think commonly people might be like, why do we have people who are, senators for 40 plus years? Like that same kind of idea of like,
Right.
why have these people been in office for, 50 years, whatever craziness it is. So very relative to that of, at some point that becomes more hurtful than helpful, I think.
Agreed. And then I think there's an important thing to call out as well is once you are a board member, you then represent that nonprofit. Like your actions all the time, all day, anytime you're in public, your actions can impact the perception of the nonprofit itself. So you all of a sudden have to be more of a what's the word? Not even a diplomat, but you're kind of a diplomat for that nonprofit. And so, being a kind person, being a good person, making sure that you're aware of your actions, both in person and online, can have a I mean, look at some of the boards that are happening these days with OpenAI, and so on. Like
Oh,
there's
yeah.
definitely some tangible and meaningful impacts that you can have based on your actions, whether you're at the table or not. That I think it's important to call out. I want to know if you had any perspective on that.
Oh yeah, and it's not something you should say yes to without thoroughly thinking about how it will impact your life and the choices and decisions you need to make and the responsibility it puts it on your shoulder. There's a lot of due diligence when you're a board member, and there are certain expectations of fiduciary diligence and responsibilities and ethical responsibilities. And there's a lot of things that go into board governance and just board behaviors and being a board member and all the things that fall into that. And I'm not a great expert in this realm, even though I have served on boards for many years. But yeah, there are just very certain strict expectations and responsibilities that come along with service and knowing what that entails, and that you are intrinsically tied into that organization when you become a board member. So the decisions you make from a financial perspective for that organization, you have responsibility for. If something happens on a financial side, you are partially responsible. If something happens with something in the news or, some kind of story or whatever it might be, like you could potentially be pulled into that as a board member because you are a representation of that organization. And I also want to call out too, like we have had a lot of issues with school boards in my part of the world lately, and a lot of chaos with our library board and things like this. And one thing to know is that you act as one board. You do not act as an individual board member in the public sphere. So you should never go and think that you have the authority to represent the organization that you're a board member for. Of course you do when you're at like networking events, or you're like at, a get on board event like we run here in Indianapolis every year, where you're pitching your organization, you're doing recruitment. In those instances, of course, you're representing your org and you can share about your org and market your org. But when it comes to, stories out in the public or news reporters or news stories or publishing things to kind of like the generic public, like you should never, unless you are the president who does have the authority to speak on behalf of the board, you should never be in that position where you are acting as a representative or doing things without consulting your board, because you really do act as one unit together. And things become very hairy and can get very difficult and very things can happen if you go outside of that realm. So just be very careful about where you position yourself when and things like that, and being aware of who has the responsibility and authority to do that, because we have seen it play out here of people kind of going rogue or doing things on their own or taking responsibility where it wasn't really in their realm to do so. So there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot more. If you're looking for a resource on these things, Kim Donahue is a great one. She owns a consulting company here in Indianapolis, and she is a wealth of knowledge about the responsibilities and due diligence that comes with being a board member and what to consider in that realm. So highly recommend finding her on LinkedIn or finding her on Google and looking at her stuff, because she knows a depth of information in this realm.
Awesome. And being a tech guy, I was a bit disappointed to hear that nothing to do with technology has been listed in terms of board members. But I'm curious to know, is there any element of tech that a board member could use or leverage or influence? I'm not even sure the right word, but is there any tech element to this? Is this really just a sit down conversation, add your input, add your advices, do the fundraising, do the marketing? But is there any general tech? I don't know, I'm thinking like a CRM perhaps, but any other tech could be useful as well. AI maybe these days that would help a board member be better, contribute more, or be more beneficial to the nonprofit.
Yeah, I mean, on that flip side of just like on the personal basis, it really is how you would use any tech to develop your career, develop your professional skills. So I don't think there's really any differentiation there, for instance. But where I come from, when I think tech, I'm thinking about what tech can a board together use to better facilitate their meetings and their work and their collaboration. And I think nonprofit boards are still very much behind the times of being able to work remotely well, figure out how to address that, because that's another thing that can open your board up to so much more diversity if you stop forcing people to go meet in a room for 2 hours in person once a month. The
Quite right.
second you make that switch and you give more flexibility there, no matter how that looks, whether it's a call-in line, whether it's equity across Zoom, whether it's hybrid, whether it's 1 month in person, 1 month over a call, whatever you can do to enable more people to be involved, I think that has been a huge crux and a huge blocker to the development of many boards and being able to pull in the people that we're desperately missing, because there's a lot of conversations in the nonprofit space of the barriers to board service and what keeps people from board service, and especially the people that we are so lacking in the seats and in the rooms. You think about working mothers, you think about people who might not have access to standard or reliable transportation, people who work odd hours and can't make typical board meeting times work. Like, there's so much that falls into that conversation. And I think if we can modernize the way that we run board meetings, what we even consider as a board meeting, that can open up so much opportunity. So thinking about, what tech are you using to run your meetings? What tech are you using to facilitate your board materials and your board packets and things like that? Can you use things like Boardable, which is an Indianapolis-based tech company that focuses on how to improve board member communication, collaboration, meetings, facilitating conversations, things like that. This is more probably on the actual org side, but you mentioned like CRM, things like that. Well, can you purchase a tool like Bloomerang, which is also like CRM for nonprofits and being able to have insight into donor data, things like that. But I think that is a huge area that nonprofit boards need to address, is what technology are we bringing in to make our organizations and our boardrooms more accessible, more feasible, more efficient, more effective. And I think a lot of orgs have really stumbled in making that transition or adoption and haven't brought in the right people with the right skills that know how to do it. And so this is where I advocate, like, find some remote workers. Like, I've worked remotely for the last 6 years. So there are people out there who know how to make this work, know how to make it equitable, know how to make it work across people and areas and things like that. And so I think that's a big gap when you bring technology in the conversation, is how do we find ways to use technology to open up doors for people who may not have ever had doors open before when it comes to board service?
I love the shout outs, the referrals to local business in Indiana. That's lovely. Awesome to hear it. I'm curious then, looking forward, I remember there was a conversation we had about certain tolls that were being taken. I believe it was about nonprofits, but it could be about the board members. And I'm curious to know, just in general, what kind of trends do you see related to being a board member and board members in general in the near future?
Yeah, I think one interesting one I've been a part of and have seen kind of brewing in the nonprofit space is reevaluating your expectations of your board, especially when it comes to financial contributions. Many organizations are beginning to have more conversations about how, again, to make board service more accessible, more feasible, more equitable. And a lot of times that expected donation or expected give get can be a barrier, especially in times like we're living in now, where inflation is through the roof, mortgage rates are through the roof, the percentages on getting a loan are through the roof. Everything costs more and people are getting laid off left and right, and the job market is so tough. Like, things are really in dire straits right now. And I see that every day in my mom's group of people asking for help. And so I think a lot of nonprofits are beginning to wonder, like, is this structured? I expect you to donate $500, $1,000 to that, whatever amount it is. is this the right structure? Is that expectation actually harming you in the long run? Because you are essentially, saying no to a lot of people because there might be people out there who cannot make that level of contribution, but their contributions in every other way might far out exceed that monetary value that you're expecting them to bring. So there's a lot of conversations in the space about readdressing kind of like your board expectation of a financial donation or things like that. And one thing I've seen really great of a past org do is the expectation isn't a monetary amount, it isn't set, but the only thing that they stipulate is we must be within your top three, nonprofit financial investments of the year. And I think that was a very interesting and feasible way to approach that because, you're still stating like we should be of a significance in your life and we should still be receiving some kind of monetary donation, but they don't stipulate what that means. And a large donation for someone can mean vastly different things across people, right? Like a large donation to me could mean $100. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if that's all I can give, if I'm willing to give the time and the effort and the due diligence to serve on a board. So I think that's one conversation a lot of orgs are having is figuring out how they approach that financial part of being a board member and what the expectation is. And I will say again, all of your board members should at least donate $1. Like you have to have full board participation in your giving. It doesn't matter how much, but again, every board member should be expected to donate. Again, at what level? I think there's lots of conversations. And again, like the more we can open doors to people and the more that we can bring that diversity of thought and backgrounds and ages and all the things that swirl into that, I think this is a very big conversation because again, like you kind of open this question for, we're in hard times, there's a lot of people who maybe 5 years ago could have given a lot more than they can give today. And so should that impact their ability to serve your board? I'm not quite sure.
The fact that you recommend board members should donate, I completely agree with, because there's something to be said. There's some rule, I'm not sure it's a reciprocity rule or another one, but the idea is once you've given once you've given financially, you then value what you receive as a result of it. I remember it was my therapist actually that said that, if she gave therapy for free, people wouldn't value what she's actually offering. It's because she's charging so much that you value what she's saying. And I thought that was a really wonderful and simple and brilliant observation. And I think it applies here as well. The minute you are, as a board member, donating toward the organization, you are now, committing an act to really commit to it. And you will be more involved in making it successful because you are an active participant of it versus someone who just lays back and talks a lot or isn't as committed because I haven't done that financial transaction. There's something magical about that transaction. I wish I remembered that law. It's like a sales law of some kind. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, and you are spot on there. You have to have investments made to have that value and that buy-in, right? And where I think nonprofits are going to go in these conversations is how can we offer our potential board members a kind of build your own of, where can you be of service? And there's certain stipulations and levels that everyone has to meet, right? Everyone has to make a donation. Everyone has to attend X amount of meetings. Everyone needs to serve on either a committee or they need to donate X amount of volunteer hours per month or per quarter. Like there's certain levels everyone needs to be expected to serve because that's how you have, again, build like equity and fairness across people. But then having enough flexibility of, for instance, going back to my holiday mart mention, there's some people who just November is not a good time for them for a myriad of reasons. And so we have flexible opportunities where if for some reason you desperately cannot make because as a normal, like not normal, but just a member of Junior League of Indianapolis, you have to serve a 4-hour shift during Holiday Mart. Like that's part of your membership qualification. But we know that there are some people where that is a crazy time for them, or they're out of town, or they travel for work a ton and they're not even physically here. So having opportunities for them to voice that and make a trade off there, right? So it's not that they're getting out of that commitment, but they're just trading it because for some reason or another, it's not going to fit in to how their life is or where they're at or things like that. And so I think we're going to start seeing a lot more flexibility of how you make your investments as a board member. Again, I think there are going to be stipulations and certain things that don't go away and are always kind of an expectation. But I think we're going to begin to see more flexibility and kind of plug and play to allow people to come to the table who haven't before.
This has been awesome. There's a lot of great insight, a lot of great information, but I imagine there'll be some people, some listeners who will have some follow-up questions. So I'm curious if you could share with them your information so they can get in touch with you if they do have some questions.
Yeah, the easiest way to get in communication with me is to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's kind of my professional network of choice. So just look up Lindsay McGuire. One weird thing you'll see is my actual LinkedIn slug says Lindsay Latteroo because I'm a slacker and I never changed it to my married name. So I guess just paying homage to my roots. But yes, happy to connect with anyone over on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me. One thing I love to do for people as far as nonprofit service is reach out to me and I can kind of guide you in what organizations might be a great fit for you, dependent upon your location, your passion areas, where you want to serve. I actually went on Ashley Amber's podcast recently and even pitched that as kind of part of my interview of, send me a message and I'll be happy to talk to you about where you might be able to best fit into service. Because a lot of organizations are national and have local chapters, like Junior League is one of those. So highly recommend if you're a woman looking for ways to network with other women, serve your community, and better grow and develop. Definitely look into Junior League. It's been one of the best experiences of my life. Been a member for 5+ years now. So happy to chat more.
Awesome. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. It was great.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.